Hello and welcome everybody to Sports Law, a basic roadmap of what you need to know. This will be the first part of a series of presentations regarding various aspects of sports law, and we will cover a number of areas today as well as areas in our future presentations. So my name is Mark Conrad. I direct the Sports Business Initiative at Fordham University's Gabelli School of Business, where I also serve as Associate Professor of Law and Ethics. And moving to our next slide, a little bit of introduction about me. I teach and write about sports law and business, as I said, mainly and full-time at Fordham's Gabelli School of Business, where I now direct a new initiative on sports business, law, and policy. In addition, I have served as an adjunct professor at Columbia University's graduate program in sport management, where I teach a course in international and comparative sports law. And finally, I have been an adjunct professor at St. John's University Law School in New York, where I teach a sports law class. So moving to our next slide, let's talk about the learning goals for this particular presentation. And as I said, the first of several parts, the goal here is a macro-level introduction to sports law. We're not going to delve into specific topics in great detail for the most part because there is simply so much to cover. But we will feature several key areas. Some would be very well known to many of you, but some areas are really underrated and deserve more explanation and more examination. So today what we're going to do is cover sports governance issues, dispute resolution, contracts in sports, and COVID. Moving to our next slide, a key point that I'd like to discuss before we get into any of our basic discussion topics. And sports law is a combination of rules under public law, certainly our public law, meaning their constitutional implications, statutory laws that affect sports, and common law rules made by courts in various areas of sports. But just as important, maybe even more, in the day-to-day operations of sports business entities, is that sports is a series of private law rules that govern the leagues, the teams, colleges, individual sports, and recreational sports. And that is something that I am going to focus on for quite a bit of this presentation, and also it can rear its head in future presentations as well. Because basically, sports are privately operated, there are private entities involved, they could be non-for-profit corporations, they could be LLCs, they could be traditional partnerships in some cases, and they do have their own rules and regulations based to a great extent on various laws regarding private organizations, I should say. And we will discuss, the key points and the discretion of these organizations to be run under those private rules as long as they do not contradict the public law aspects, that is constitutionally, statutorily, and based on court rulings. So let's move on to our next slide, and let's give some examples. So here are some laws that are applicable to sports. In terms of legislation, you'll see a spate of these laws. Some are more sports-oriented and some are not. Certainly the National Labor Relations Act would be one, which governs labor relations in many, many industries, but we will talk about how it applies to sports in a future session. The Sherman Antitrust Act, which is a seminal statute regarding the regulation of the economy, but has also had a very, very big impact on the way sports organizations run, and certainly on the college space, which will be the subject of our next presentation. And a law called the Ted Stevens Amateur Sports Act, which essentially governs the Olympic movement in the United States. It has been amended at least once, but in a sense twice, because we have a relatively new law that applies to athletes' rights in that space too. The Safe Sport Act of 2017, and that really deals with protecting athletes from abusive coaching, and it's a law that is being used, and at least the procedures under the law are being used more and more. Sports betting, which will be the subject of a future discussion, hopefully, certainly a topic in and of itself, where states have legalized it, at least many states have legalized it in recent years. The Uniform Agents Act, and this law is a little bit more based on sports agents, which attempt to have some kind of uniform rules for sports agents in a number of states that have adopted that law. And also state and local laws regarding what we call recreational or participatory activities.